Some of you listening to me right now are tired. You're not just physically tired, your soul tired. You've been holding on, praying, fasting, trusting, and yet nothing seems to shift. You've asked, God, where are you? But I came to tell you today, He's closer than you think. Restoration isn't coming. It's already moving in your direction. And if you're seeing these 7 signs, then buckle your seatbelt. Your breakthrough's right at the door. Break it into a flow that's easy to preach, teach, with pauses and emphasis like Dr. Myles Munroe. Clear, revelatory, and deep, unusual resistance before peace. Unusual resistance before peace is not a mistake. It's a message. It is the divine law of transition. Before every dawn, there is an intense darkness. Before every healing, there is an unbearable pain. And before every breakthrough, there is a strange increase in pressure that makes you question everything. This resistance is not a sign that God has abandoned you. It is a sign that something is trying to block what God is about to release over your life. Have you ever noticed that just when you decide to pray more, fast more, or get serious about your calling, all of a sudden life starts falling apart. People start acting funny. Your finances start drying up. Your own thoughts begin to rebel against your faith. That's not random. That's warfare before the wind shifts. Every time God is about to take you higher, hell tries to pull you lower. Why? Because breakthrough always invites resistance. Think about it in practical terms. A woman about to give birth doesn't go through peace first. She goes through pain, contractions, pressure, and confusion. Her body feels like it's betraying her. But all that resistance is a signal that the child is close. The chaos is not a curse, it's a countdown. You are not being attacked because of where you are. You're being attacked because of where you're headed. In your personal life, think about the times you were closest to quitting. Wasn't it right before something shifted? Maybe you were ready to walk away from the relationship, the business, the ministry, the dream, because everything around you was screaming, this is over. But suddenly, somehow a door opened, a connection came, a word was spoken. That's not luck, that's divine timing. The resistance was a sign that the enemy was nervous. He doesn't attack what isn't threatening. So if your life feels like a battlefield, it's because your destiny looks like a bomb about to go off in the spirit. I remember a friend who started a small business. For the first few months, things looked promising, but the moment she signed the lease for her new location, her bank account got attacked, her friends disappeared, and even her family questioned her decision. She told me, I think I made a mistake. I looked her in the eye and said, no, you made a move. And every time you make a move toward your purpose, resistance will try to scare you back into passivity. Months later, that business became a blessing to her entire neighborhood. What she thought was a breakdown was just the shaking that comes before a divine setup. Resistance isn't always visible. Sometimes it's mental. You start doubting your worth. You replay your past mistakes. You begin to wonder if restoration is for someone else and not for you. But hear this, your mind becomes the battlefield because the enemy knows he can't stop what God has already written, so he tries to convince you to forfeit it yourself. That's why when you're closest to the promise, your thoughts will become the loudest enemies. That's why peace feels far. But peace isn't the absence of pressure. Peace is the presence of purpose under pressure. Real peace says, even though this storm is raging, I trust the one who controls the wind. That's why the resistance before peace is so important. It forces you to press into faith, not your feelings. It causes you to look up when everything around you says give up. You need to stop thinking that resistance means rejection. No, it means you're in alignment. It means your life is creating friction in the spirit realm. That friction is fire. It is refining your faith, burning off what's weak and preparing you to carry what you prayed for. God never prepares a blessing without preparing the vessel. Do you remember Joseph? Right before he was elevated to second in command in Egypt, he was betrayed by his brothers, thrown in a pit, lied on by Potiphar's wife, and forgotten in a prison. That wasn't punishment, it was pressure. The pressure that comes before peace, the resistance that comes before restoration. Joseph had a dream, and that dream provoked resistance. But the resistance was the road that led him to the dream's fulfillment. So the next time all hell breaks loose in your life, don't ask, God, why is this happening to me? Ask, God, what is this resistance trying to reveal about what's coming? Because if the warfare is intense, then the breakthrough must be incredible. The devil only hits hard when you're carrying something heavy. You are carrying restoration. You are carrying destiny. That's why the resistance feels like a war zone. Some of you are crying right now because your life feels like you're in a wrestling match with invisible enemies. You feel like the more you pray, the more the pressure increases. But I came to tell you that's the resistance before peace. That's the evidence that the door is close. You don't need to panic. You need to persevere. You don't need a new word. You need to stand on the one God already gave you. There is a pressure before peace, but peace is on the other side. There is chaos before the calm, but the calm is coming. There is a shaking before the shift, but the shift is scheduled. Don't confuse the war at the gate with the absence of a door. The resistance is proof the door is already in place. A holy discontent rises in your spirit. A holy discontent is not a bad feeling. It's a divine signal. It's when your soul starts telling you, there has to be more than this. You could be surrounded by comfort and still feel uncomfortable. You could have a good job, a nice house, some stability, but deep down, something in you keeps whispering, this isn't it. I was made for more. That right there is not frustration. That's heaven knocking on the door of your spirit. You see, people assume that when God is ready to restore you, he will just drop blessings into your lap. But restoration doesn't begin with a gift. It begins with a disturbance. God stirs your spirit before he shifts your situation. That discontent you're feeling, that unease, that emotional itch you can't seem to scratch, that's holy agitation. It's divine dissatisfaction. It's the Spirit of God saying, wake up. Get ready? I'm pulling you out of the ordinary and pushing you into the extraordinary. Many people silence that feeling because they're scared of disrupting the comfortable. But comfort zones are beautiful places where nothing grows. You weren't born to fit in. You were born to be stirred, stretched, and sent. And God will allow everything around you to become too small so that you will stop shrinking your vision to fit your environment. That's why you're feeling restless. That's why the things you used to enjoy now feel dry. That's why certain friendships feel forced and certain spaces feel fake. God is turning off the flavor in your life so you will stop feasting at tables that no longer serve your destiny. You ever had your favorite meal from a restaurant and one day you eat it and it just doesn't taste the same? That's not because the chef forgot the recipe. It's because your taste has changed. You've grown. You've evolved. And when your appetite changes, it's a signal that your season has shifted. That's what a holy discontent does. It recalibrates your appetite for average. You no longer crave applause. You crave assignment. You're not after likes, you're after legacy. I remember speaking to a young woman who worked in corporate for nearly a decade. She was successful by the world's standards, big salary, promotions, company car. But she told me, every morning I wake up with this H in my chest, not anxiety, not depression. Just this knowing that I'm meant for something different. I told her, that's not a midlife crisis. That's a mid-destiny awakening. God is disrupting your routine to reveal your real calling. 6 months later, she launched a nonprofit that is now feeding and mentoring hundreds of kids. She traded titles for transformation. She moved from routine to restoration, not because everything was broken, but because something higher was calling. That's the thing. A holy discontent doesn't always come when your life is falling apart. Sometimes it shows up when everything is functioning, but not fulfilling. You're busy, but not impactful. You're surrounded, but still lonely. You're achieving, but not aligning. And in that sacred frustration, God says, no, you're ready to listen. In Scripture, Moses lived in Pharaoh's palace. He had luxury, royalty, influence, but he wasn't at peace. Something in him said, this isn't home. I was born for more than this robe and crown. That discontent became the door to his divine assignment. He left what was comfortable and embraced what was divine. That's what God is doing with you. You're not crazy. You're not confused. You're being called out. And I get it. People around you won't always understand. They'll say, you should be grateful. Look at all you have. But how do you explain to someone that you're grateful and grieving at the same time? That you're not unthankful, you're just unsettled. Because God didn't create you for convenience. He created you for calling. You can't stay in the nest when your wings are growing. That discomfort is divine. It's meant to drive you forward. You might feel like your dreams are louder at night than your life is during the day. You go to sleep with vision and wake up with reality. That's holy discontent at work. It's God showing you the gap between where you are and where He's taking you. And the longer you ignore it, the more restless you'll become, not because you're doing something wrong, but because you're being summoned into something right. Some of you are wondering why your relationships aren't clicking anymore, why the job feels empty, why your goals feel like chores. It's because you're outgrowing your current capacity. And instead of trying to fix everything around you, you need to recognize that the agitation in your spirit is the announcement of your next season. Don't run from it, lean into it. Discontent is not always from the devil. Sometimes it's the GPS of heaven rerouting your life. It's how God lets you know the cloud has moved, the grace has shifted, and the time has come. And when that moment comes, you will no longer be okay playing small. You will no longer silence your gifts. You will no longer settle for what looks good but lacks God. Something in you will cry out, there must be more, and heaven will answer, yes, and I'm about to show you. Divine disconnections happen. Divine disconnections are often the most painful yet purposeful things God allows in our lives. They don't always come with a warning. One day, someone is walking with you, supporting you, encouraging you, calling you family. And the next, they disappear, distance themselves, or even turn against you. It leaves you wondering what went wrong. what you did, or if you misunderstood God's plan. But here's the truth: not every connection is meant to last. Some people were only assigned to your life for a specific season. And when that season is over, God will disconnect what you don't have the strength to release. You must understand, God is not just the God of open doors. He is also the God of closed ones. And when He closes a door, removes a person, or ends a relationship, it is never random. It is divine. If you keep crying over what He cut off, you'll delay what He's trying to bring next. Some people are like scaffolding. They're necessary during the construction phase. But once the building is complete, the scaffolding must come down. Keeping them around too long will only block the next layer of glory. You've got to trust the disconnect. God saw conversations you didn't. He heard thoughts behind their smile that never reached your ears. He read hearts you couldn't discern. And He knew that where He's taking you, they couldn't go. Some connections are liabilities in disguise, beautiful on the outside, but destructive to your purpose. So when God removes someone, He's not punishing you. He's protecting the oil on your life. You can't keep walking with people who don't respect your anointing. You can't keep explaining your growth to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. I once spoke to a young man who told me how devastated he was that his closest friend suddenly ghosted him during one of the hardest seasons of his life. He was angry. He said, "How could they leave when I needed them most?" I looked him in the eye and said, "Sometimes people leave not because they're evil, but because their assignment is complete." God will remove people from your boat before the storm hits, not because they're enemies, but because their weight will capsize the vessel. Some people aren't meant to endure the storm with you. They were only meant to help you build the boat. Even Jesus had to deal with divine disconnection. Judas was part of the plan. He walked with Jesus, ate with Him, laughed with Him, and still He betrayed Him. Why? Because Judas wasn't a mistake. He was a necessary separation. Without Judas, there is no cross. Without the cross, there is no resurrection. So stop cursing the people who walked away. Some exits are actually divine escorts to your next chapter. Some betrayals are blessings in disguise. Some losses are strategic removals. Don't try to reattach what God has cut. Don't try to glue broken connections that God severed for your protection. Every disconnection isn't the devil. Some disconnections are the surgical hands of the Holy Spirit, removing what would contaminate your future. And when God prunes your life, it's not to punish you. It's to multiply your fruit. You may feel lonely, but that loneliness is often the space God clears out so He can speak to you without interruption. There's a reason some friends changed, some circles shrank, some voices went silent. You didn't lose them. You were liberated from them. The more anointed you become, the more isolated you may feel, because the higher God takes you, the thinner the air gets. Not everyone can breathe where God is elevating you. So don't fight the loneliness. Don't resent the separation. Learn to see it through the eyes of heaven. This is not rejection. This is redirection. You may have loved them, leaned on them, built with them, but love does not always equal alignment. Just because someone started with you doesn't mean they're anointed to finish with you. And if you try to hold on to expired relationships, you'll end up poisoned by the very people you're trying to protect. You can't fulfill your destiny while dragging corpses from your history. At some point, you have to say, "God, I trust your wisdom even when it hurts. I trust your disconnections even when they confuse me." I remember a woman who was crushed after her business partner of 7 years suddenly betrayed her. The pain was deep because the bond ran deep. But a year later, that betrayal opened the door for her to rebrand, restructure, and relaunch her company in a way that quadrupled her revenue. She told me, if he hadn't left, I would have never realized how small I was thinking. What felt like betrayal was actually a breakthrough in disguise. That's how divine disconnections work. They don't always come with closure. They don't always make sense in the moment. But in time, they reveal their purpose. You realize the people who left weren't the foundation. They were the scaffolding. You realize the closed door wasn't the end. It was an exit to a better hallway. You realize that sometimes God subtracts to multiply. So stop mourning what God has removed. Stop chasing people who walked out of alignment. Stop begging to be kept in places where God has already exited. When heaven disconnects, it's because destiny is calling. When divine disconnection happens, it's not the end. It's the separation before the elevation. Confirmation comes from everywhere. Confirmation comes from everywhere when God is about to break you through. It won't just come from your pastor, your mentor, or your Bible app notification. It will start showing up in places you didn't even expect. It's when you're scrolling social media and a random post says exactly what you needed to hear. It's when a stranger says something in passing that echoes the very prayer you whispered at 3:17 a.m. It's when the lyrics of a song hit you so hard, you have to pull over and catch your breath. That's not coincidence. That's confirmation. That's God saying, "I heard you. I see you. And I'm speaking directly to your spirit, loud and clear." When your breakthrough is near, God will flood your atmosphere with signals, signs, and whispers. You'll start seeing your own words come out of other people's mouths. A sermon you've never watched before will hit every point you've been wrestling with. A friend will text you something random like, "Don't give up," not knowing you were just about to quit. That's not luck. That's God. That's what happens when the spiritual world is leaning in close, saying, "Stay in position. You're almost there." I remember speaking with a man who had been jobless for over a year. Every door closed. Every interview ended with a polite rejection. He told me he started questioning everything, his worth, his skills, even his prayers. But then he began noticing something strange. Every time he went out, someone would mention new beginnings. One day it was a billboard. The next is the cover of a book someone left on a bus seat. Another time it was a random conversation he overheard in a cafe. He said, "I thought I was going crazy, like God was teasing me." I told him, "No, you were being confirmed." And 2 weeks later, the very company that rejected him 6 months ago called him back with a better offer than he even asked for. You see, when your spirit is aligned, your environment starts speaking. God doesn't just whisper. He orchestrates a surround sound experience to get your attention. Some people are waiting for a loud voice from heaven when God is already talking in the silence. Confirmation often comes in repetition. If you keep hearing the same thing over and over, don't ignore it. That's not your imagination. That's divine synchronization. That's when heaven and earth are syncing up and God is tuning your frequency. When you're on the edge of breakthrough, your ears become sensitive, your heart becomes soft, and everything around you becomes a vessel God can use. A woman once told me she'd been praying for clarity on whether to move to another city. She felt peace one day and panicked the next. But then, out of nowhere, the city name kept popping up on radio shows, on license plates, on packages she never ordered, even in her dreams. She said, "I felt like I was being followed." I told her, "You weren't being followed, you were being confirmed." God knows how to surround you with signs that bypass your doubt and speak straight to your soul. When you're confused, He clarifies. When you're afraid, He confirms. And you don't have to chase signs. Signs will chase you. When you're in divine alignment, you don't beg for confirmation. It flows to you. You don't have to twist God's arm. You just have to open your eyes. He'll use the ordinary to reveal the extraordinary. A child's question, a random quote, even the pattern of the clouds. Nothing is off limits when God wants to get your attention. The wind knows His voice. The earth obeys His rhythm. And your circumstances will start to echo His message until you realize this is not random. This is God. And here's the part that will blow your mind sometimes. The confirmation comes right after the greatest contradiction. You'll get bad news and immediately feel peace. You'll face a rejection and suddenly get a prophetic word that says, "Don't give up." It's in those moments that God shows you that confirmation doesn't always agree with your reality. It agrees with your destiny. God's confirmation is not about what you see. It's about what He said, and what He said He will do. That's why you must pay attention. Don't miss the clues because you're looking for fireworks. Some of the most powerful confirmations come in whispers, in pauses, in patterns, in the stillness of your room or the fire in your chest that refuses to go out, that feeling that won't leave you alone, that relentless thought that won't let you quit. That's heaven confirming your calling, even when everything around you looks the opposite. Confirmation will chase you when you stay faithful. It will show up in your valley, not just on your mountaintop. God doesn't wait until you win to whisper. He starts affirming you in the waiting room. And when you hear it, when you feel that divine echo, hold on to it like an anchor. Because when everything else shakes, confirmation will remind you that you're still on schedule. It may not be fast, it may not be flashy, but if God said it, He will back it up. That's why you can't ignore it when everything starts pointing in the same direction. When your spirit leaps even though your eyes can't see. When you feel something deeper than motivation, something like momentum building in your bones. That's not hype, that's not imagination. That's divine confirmation breathing down your neck, saying, "Get ready." What you've been waiting for is closer than you think. You begin to see yourself differently. You begin to see yourself differently when God is about to bring restoration into your life. It doesn't start on the outside. It starts deep within, in the quiet corners of your identity. Suddenly, the same things that used to satisfy you no longer hold weight. You walk into the same rooms but feel like you don't belong there anymore. Not because you're arrogant, but because your spirit knows something is shifting. God is upgrading your self-perception before He upgrades your situation. That's why the change begins internally, because He has to prepare your mind to handle the breakthrough before He places it in your hands. There's a divine tension that starts building. The mirror doesn't just reflect your face, it starts showing you glimpses of your future. You start sensing the leader in you, the healer in you, the giant in you, even if no one else sees it yet. It's like you're waking up from a long slumber and your soul is suddenly aware of its worth. You stop accepting crumbs because you know you're made for banquets. You stop watering down your voice to fit in circles that were never meant to hold your fire. That's what happens when restoration is near. You begin to walk like someone who expects more, because heaven has already whispered to your spirit, you are more. I spoke with a woman once who was stuck in a cycle of toxic relationships. For years, she believed she wasn't good enough, smart enough, pretty enough, until one day something shifted. She said, I just woke up and I couldn't take it anymore. I looked at myself in the mirror and cried, not because I was broken, but because I saw a glimpse of who I was becoming. That's not therapy. That's transformation. That's the Holy Spirit resurrecting your view of yourself from the ashes of people's opinions. When God is about to restore you, He starts by changing your inner script. He edits the story you've been telling yourself. Instead of, I'm not enough, you start hearing, I'm chosen. Instead of, I always mess up, you start declaring, I am being refined. The people around you may not understand it. They may say you've changed. And guess what? They're right. You have changed because you've stopped letting brokenness be your identity. You've stopped wearing shame like a uniform. You're starting to realize that restoration isn't about going back to who you used to be. It's about stepping into who you were born to become. That shift in how you see yourself is the blueprint for everything God wants to do next. You cannot walk in a palace with a slave mentality. You cannot carry a crown with a cracked mindset. So before God puts the robe on your shoulders, He restores the royalty in your reflection. It may happen quietly. It may happen in the shower, in your car, or during a moment of stillness. But you'll feel it, that pull to do better, that urge to clean your space, level up your habits, delete some numbers, get serious about your calling. You're not being dramatic, you're being prepared. God is letting you taste the weight of destiny so that when He opens the door, you'll already be walking like it belongs to you. A man once told me he'd been praying for a promotion at his job. But one morning, before anything changed in his position, something shifted in his posture. He said, I started dressing different, walking different, talking like I belonged in the boardroom, even when I was still stuck in the back office. 3 months later, without warning, he was called into a meeting and offered a leadership role that hadn't even existed before. Why? Because he saw himself differently first. His internal shift triggered an external elevation. This is how it works. Restoration doesn't start with applause. It starts with awareness. You become aware that you're no longer who you used to be. You become aware that something sacred is waking up in you. You start to dream again. You start to expect differently. Even your prayers change. You no longer just pray to survive the week. You start praying like someone who knows they were born for impact. That's when you know God is close. When your vision of yourself becomes too big to fit in your current life, you may still have struggles. You may still be waiting for the marriage, the healing, the opportunity. But even in the wait, there's a confidence that begins to rise. It's not cockiness, it's divine awareness. You know something's coming because you're becoming someone new. You don't need a prophet to confirm it. Your posture is already preaching it. You don't walk with your head down anymore. You don't settle for chaos disguised as comfort. You don't beg for spaces that dishonor your value. You've seen a glimpse of the restored version of you, and now there's no turning back. You are being reintroduced to the person you were always meant to be. And that revelation, before the money, before the platform, before the restoration shows up in your bank account, is the most powerful sign that breakthrough is near. Because when you start seeing yourself the way heaven sees you, you attract what aligns with that identity. Doors open, connections flow, strategies appear, because your mind is no longer begging, it's building. Your heart is no longer hiding, it's healing. And your soul is no longer surviving, it's soaring. Old desires die off. You crave purpose. You'll know restoration is near when the things you used to chase no longer excite you. When the applause you once craved sounds hollow. When the attention you used to seek feels cheap, that's not depression, that's transformation. That's the sign that your spirit is growing out of its old appetite. The desires that once ruled your life begin to feel foreign. The parties, the performance, the people-pleasing, it no longer satisfies your soul because God is purging you of everything that can't go with you to the next level. You start craving depth over distraction, purpose over popularity, impact over impression. That's how you know your breakthrough is close. You don't just want change, you want meaning. I remember talking to a man who said, I used to want to be famous. I wanted the house, the car, the followers, the recognition. But lately, I just want peace. I want to do something that matters. I want to be able to sleep at night, knowing I didn't waste my life. That's the shift. That's when you stop being driven by ego and start being led by destiny. That's when your appetite evolves. You're no longer hungry for surface things because your spirit is now feeding on eternal things. You may not even notice it at first. It starts subtly. The music you used to vibe with suddenly feels noisy. The jokes that once made you laugh now feel tasteless. The conversations you used to entertain now leave you empty. That's because your soul is undergoing renovation. You're shedding old desires like dead skin. And it's not because you're better than others. It's because you're being called to something bigger than yourself. You're being positioned for purpose. Think about a caterpillar. When it goes into the cocoon, it loses its taste for crawling. Why? Because something greater is emerging. Wings are forming. Vision is expanding. And when the transformation is complete, it can't go back to crawling even if it wanted to. That's what happens when you're being prepared for restoration. God begins to dismantle your dependency on the shallow so he can launch you into the deep. He's not punishing you, he's pruning you. One woman told me she used to live for relationships. She couldn't stand being alone. Her phone always had to be buzzing. But one day, she said, I don't know what happened, but I just got tired of repeating the same cycles. I didn't want attention anymore. I wanted alignment. That's not emotional exhaustion. That's a divine detox. That's what happens when God starts clearing the clutter so your calling can breathe. He'll let your old desires fail you so you can finally see what your soul really needs. You don't crave parties anymore, you crave purpose. You don't chase followers anymore, you chase clarity. You're not impressed by loud rooms. You want rooms that speak to your potential. And yes, it may feel lonely. Yes, you may outgrow some friends. Yes, you may walk through a season where it feels like nobody understands you. But don't panic. That's what happens when you stop living for comfort and start living for calling. Your energy shifts. You guard your peace. You start saying no to things that once got an automatic "where's." And at first, you'll question yourself. You'll wonder, why don't I enjoy this anymore? Why am I not excited like I used to be? But deep down, you'll know your purpose is waking up. And when purpose wakes up, preference gets quiet. You stop doing things just because they feel good. You start doing things because they do good. Old desires are addictive. They feed the ego. They provide momentary highs, but they leave you spiritually bankrupt. That's why God has to detox your desires before he deposits your destiny. He can't release the breakthrough while you're still clinging to what breaks you. He has to burn off the cravings that once controlled you so that when he finally delivers the blessing, you won't sabotage it out of immaturity. I knew a young man who used to hustle for validation. Every decision he made was rooted in how others would perceive him. But then God started dealing with him quietly. Privately, he said, I started waking up in the middle of the night with tears in my eyes. Not because I was sad, but because I felt like I was being reborn. That's what it looks like. You lose interest in the game. You stop trying to fit into spaces that require you to shrink. You stop entertaining habits that hijack your growth. You don't even mourn the loss of old desires because you've tasted the substance of something greater, purpose. This is what happens when breakthrough is near. God doesn't just shift your situation. He rewires your cravings. You begin to hunger for righteousness, for wholeness, for wisdom, for legacy. The applause of man fades and the approval of heaven becomes your compass. You're no longer trying to prove yourself. You're trying to become yourself, the highest version of who you were always created to be. And no amount of temporary gratification can compete with that. Because once you know your purpose, anything that distracts from it starts to feel like poison. Your spirit refuses to settle. You're no longer impressed by noise. You're drawn to meaning. You no longer run after attention. You walk in assignment. You don't need a crowd. You need confirmation. And you don't need to be seen. You need to be sent. You hear God louder in silence. You know your breakthrough is near when God starts pulling you into silence. It's not a punishment, it's a preparation. When heaven is about to speak loudly, God first teaches you how to hear in the quiet. The distractions begin to fall away, not because you're running from people, but because you're being drawn into presence. You stop needing to be everywhere and start being content in stillness. You're not isolating, you're incubating. Something is being formed in your silence that can't survive in noise. You begin to notice that the more quiet your world becomes, the louder your spirit grows. You hear things you used to overlook. You feel convictions that once seemed faint. And more importantly, you start hearing God's voice with clarity. No filters, no background noise, just his voice, direct, gentle, powerful. That's how restoration begins, not with a crowd shouting over your pain, but with God whispering truth into your confusion. And in that silence, you're not being ignored, you're being refined. There was a woman I met who had just come out of a devastating season. Her business failed, her relationship ended, and she told me everything just went quiet. My phone stopped ringing, the invites stopped coming. Even my own thoughts felt still. And at first, it felt like abandonment. But then she said, started to hear God in ways I never had before. In the morning breeze, in the scriptures I used to skip, in the tears I cried on my bedroom floor. And suddenly I realized he wasn't absent, he was amplifying his voice. That's what silence does. It strips away the static so revelation can enter. You begin to differentiate between your voice, the enemy's lies, and God's truth. The silence becomes your sanctuary. You stop looking for signs in the sky and start hearing whispers in your soul. And the deeper the silence, the clearer the instruction. God doesn't compete with chaos. He waits until your spirit is settled before he downloads strategy. You may look around and feel like everything has gone still. No doors opening, no excitement, no movement. But don't mistake stillness for stagnation. Trees grow in silence. Babies develop in silence. Diamonds form in pressure but mature in darkness. God does his best work when the noise fades. It's not a delay, it's divine focus. You're not being paused, you're being positioned. Sometimes you'll lose people in this silence. They'll say you've changed, you've become distant. But what they don't understand is that you've finally tapped into a frequency they can't hear. You're tuning into something higher now. You don't want to gossip, you want growth. You don't want drama, you want direction. You're not avoiding people, you're advancing your purpose. That's what silence does. It separates noise from necessity. There's a man I know who used to fill every moment with activity. Podcasts, calls, meetings, music. He couldn't stand silence. But when his health failed, he was forced into rest. He said, I thought it was the worst season of my life until I realized it was the most spiritual one. I finally heard God say things I didn't know I needed to hear. That's what breakthrough often looks like. Less doing, more listening. Less performance, more presence. You begin to notice that you're not as reactive anymore. Someone offends you, and instead of exploding, you pause, you breathe, you discern. That's because silence teaches restraint. It teaches emotional intelligence. It teaches patience. You no longer need to respond to everything because you've learned to respond to one voice. You've trained your spirit to value clarity over clamor. That's a powerful sign of growth. Even your prayers change. You stop filling your prayer time with endless talking and start waiting, listening, expecting. You sit in stillness and say, God, speak. I'm not in a rush. And you begin to hear solutions, insights, ideas that weren't there before. That's not coincidence. That's confirmation. He's been speaking. You've just finally learned how to hear. God will often call you into silence before a major shift. Before Jesus launched his ministry, he went into the wilderness, not to preach, but to fast and listen. Moses was called up to Mount Sinai alone. Paul spent years in Arabia before he wrote half the New Testament. Silence isn't absence, it's alignment. Heaven's strategy is often wrapped in solitude. Don't be afraid when the volume of life turns down. It's not rejection, it's redirection. Don't panic when no one is calling you. It's because God is. He's shifting your circle so he can shift your center. He's muting distractions so he can reveal direction. You're being tuned like an instrument, refined for a sound that can only be played in divine timing. One day, you'll look back on this quiet season and realize it was the most productive time of your life. Not because you were doing the most, but because you were becoming the most. Your roots were going deeper, your discernment sharper, your relationship with God unshakable. You didn't need the crowd. You didn't need the noise. You just needed clarity, and silence gave it to you. There comes a moment in every person's journey where you're no longer asking, when will it happen for me? But instead, who am I becoming while I wait? Because that's the secret. Your breakthrough is not something you're walking toward, it's something you're becoming worthy to carry. You don't just walk into destiny, you grow into it. And while you've been waiting, doubting, crying, praying, and pacing, heaven's been sculpting a version of you that can handle what's coming. You're not just waiting on a blessing. That blessing is waiting on a version of you that's finally ready. So let me remind you, delay is not denial. You're not being punished. You're being positioned. The silence you felt, that's where champions are trained. The darkness you've endured, that's where warriors are built. You see, your process is proof that the promise is real. God doesn't invest time in people he has no intention of using. If the fire is hot, it's because the gold inside of you is real. If the pressure is heavy, it's because the purpose is weighty. Diamonds are not formed in calm. They're formed under pressure. So don't curse the storm. It's birthing the strength you prayed for. Some of you thought you were being buried, but baby, you were being planted. And what's planted must rise. What's rooted must grow. You've been under for too long to stay down now. This is your season of becoming. This is where the seed breaks so the tree can rise, where the old dies so the new can reign. You can't go back to what you used to settle for. You've outgrown it. You've evolved past it. You've walked through too much pain to settle for ordinary. You survived hell, but you didn't survive to stay silent. You didn't cry those tears for nothing. You didn't break just to remain broken. You're not here by accident. You were kept, you were preserved, you were protected from things you thought you wanted because heaven had something greater waiting. And now, right now, you're standing on the edge of the very thing you used to pray for. You may not see it all yet, but your spirit feels it, that tug, that stirring. That deep sense that something's about to shift. That's confirmation. That's divine alignment. That's your breakthrough whispering, I'm near. People may not understand you right now. They'll question your silence, your solitude, your shift. Let them. When God is elevating you, he doesn't send out memos. Promotion from heaven always begins in private. And when he's done building you in the dark, he will present you in the light. So keep building, keep becoming. You are not behind, you are not late. You are right on schedule for a destiny that no devil in hell can cancel. Remember what Les Brown said, shoot for the moon. Even if you miss, you'll land among the stars. You've got to keep reaching, keep moving, keep trusting. And when you feel weak, remember, even eagles must fight the wind to fly. Even champions get tired, but they don't quit. Quitting is never an option for those who've seen what they're called to. You were not born to blend in. You were born to stand out. You were not born to break. You were born to build. You were not born to chase. You were born to command. The pain did not come to destroy you. It came to develop you. It carved you into the vessel that can now hold the very glory you once prayed for. And now all of heaven is watching, waiting, cheering as you step into the fullness of what's been written over your life. You were born for this moment. You were called for this purpose. You were chosen for this assignment. Let them talk. Let the winds blow. Let the trials come, because the one who walks with God is never outnumbered. And if God be for you, who can be against you? So rise, shake the dust, wipe the tears, fix your crown, and step boldly. You're not waiting anymore. You're walking into it. The shift has already begun. The restoration is already in motion. Your breakthrough is not coming, it's here.